Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new year of Beebe Book Buzz. This is the little half-hour show where your Beebe librarians get together and tell you what we've been reading so that you can find your next great read. We hope you will enjoy what we have to offer today. And we're going to start with Jeff.
Thanks. Um, yes, I have. I want to say this book was published kind of mid-year in 2020. It's called The New Wilderness by Diane Cook. She's a Brooklyn writer, American. And actually, this is her first novel. She's written extensively, but mostly short stuff, short stories and essays and things like this. So this is her first full-length novel, and it was selected for the shortlist for the Booker Prize. And as you know, I always try to keep up with those. And it didn't disappoint. I don't know if I would have picked it up if it had not been for that plug, but I'm glad I did. It's actually gotten kind of uniform reviews from professional reviewers, but if you read on Amazon and Goodreads and places like that, it's been a little bit more mixed, people's reactions to it, but I really enjoyed it. It is what is known in the biz as cli-fi, climate fiction, that is often dystopian or sort of post-apocalyptic, related to issues that have to do with climate change. But the thing I really liked about this particular novel is how character-driven it was. And I think all of us tend to really appreciate that more than plot. Because I think this could have been a book that was too focused on the nuts and bolts of survivalism, which is certainly a big part of it. But really, it's a story about people, and in particular, a mother and a daughter relationship. So what it is that there's been a sort of unspecified climate disaster, in the sense that the cities are still exist, but they've really gotten incredibly polluted. They're incredibly crowded. And what happens is the main character, Beatrice, has, and her husband have a young daughter named Agnes, who is about 5 years old. And like many other people, but in particular children, she's having horrible illnesses because of the pollution. And so people are, particularly wealthy people, are trying to find a way to get out and so forth, and find other ways to live. There are rumors of a private, safe location in some part of the country, but nobody really knows whether that's true or not. And anyway, what happens is they volunteer, and in fact are among the earliest volunteers for a project called the Wilderness State, which is where a certain number of self-selected people are going to be set out in this very vast wilderness, the new wilderness, that where they will kind of become hunter-gatherers again and learn to survive as human beings without any of the trappings, or almost none of the trappings, of civilization. So it's a sociological experiment, the idea being that if it's successful, it might serve as a solution to other problems in the world. And her husband was one of the first people who wanted to go. She's not sure whether she wants to go and take a child, but it seems clear that if they want their child to survive medically, they need to get her away from the city. And the rest of the book is all about what it's like for this small group of about 20 volunteers, who are literally like a nomadic early group of humans, trying to navigate in this wilderness. But there's also hints of deception and like government control behind it. They have to report periodically in certain places with rangers who take information and data from them, finding out what's going on and keep track of their behavior. So there's a whole lot of dystopian things going on here. And there is a lot about the survivalism and the conflict between the characters who come from very different backgrounds and who react to being in this kind of situation in different ways. It's all, there's a certain amount of Lord of the Flies in it, where you take a group of people like that and who's a leader and who has leadership qualities that are good and that aren't. And,
Kind of like modern day Gilligan's Island.
Yeah.
yeah, I suppose.
With
There's no Ginger and Marianne, but
There's no Ginger, Marianne? Okay.
there's no, well, I suppose there is a professor.
It's actually, it's reminding me of that. Do you remember that children's book by Gary Paulson, Hatchet?
Yes.
It's reminding me of that because he has this like sort of survivalist situation and he's a kid. So
yeah, but actually, like I said, the thing that I think that is the real crux of the story is Bee and her daughter Agnes, who grows. I mean, this actually follows a period of a few years. So by the time the book ends, Agnes is actually a teenager. So she goes through her growing phase in a period of completely different from what any other teenager would live in. And in fact, she was so young when she started this project that she has really very little memory of the world before that. Whereas all the adults, of course, have a strong connection to what life was like before. So there's a whole lot of that stuff going on, but it's the conflict between Agnes and Bee, and I don't think this is a spoiler because I think it's even mentioned in the blurb. There's a point at which they are not together for various reasons, and the gap in their relationship is also extremely important, and then they come back together. So it's the emotional drama between the mother and the daughter is just gut-wrenching. And there are some really emotionally very difficult scenes in it. And the author doesn't pull any punches about like main characters, don't get too attached to everybody because it's survivalist and, but I thought that the writing was beautiful. The characters are really well drawn, and it's not as bleak as you might think it would be. I do think that it ends on a relatively hopeful note. There's a lot of redemption. There's a lot of seeing strong female characters who take on responsibilities in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise. And you really get to love Agnes and Bee too. I mean, they're all flawed. Every person in this is flawed and human. And the whole point is you try to picture yourself. What would I do in this situation? How would I cope? How would I react? So if you like a really well done character study in a dystopian situation, it's very good. And I think for read-alikes, the two that came to mind probably the most were Flight Behavior by Barbara Kingsolver, but even more so, I think, was The Overstory by Richard, his last name escapes me. Powers, thank you. Powers. So I think, this was definitely not as long of a slog as Overstory was. I think that was a little bit more intense. But if you enjoyed the environmentalism and that perspective on the world, it was great.
Was there as much like kind of natural detail in the setting as there was in Overstory?
Yes, because it's left vague. The implication is that it's sort of northern plains, southern Canada. Like you can imagine all of this taking place in the Dakotas, Montana, the southern plains of Canada. There's prairie and mountain. So that is all very well drawn.
So not so much as a read-alike for Station 11?
I think there's a certain appeal factor to that, but this is so environmentally survivalist oriented that it goes in a slightly different direction. But I do think if you liked Station 11, this would certainly appeal to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like it definitely has some similar elements there.
Yeah.
Okay. And the name of that again, tell us again.
Oh, sorry. Again, yes, that's Diane Cook, and it's called The New Wilderness.
New Wilderness. That sounds good. Okay, Jackie, what do you got?
I actually have my book with me, which I never do. Oh, it's backwards, isn't it? Because I just finished it last night.
Right.
I read Moonflower Murders by Anthony Horowitz. This is his latest. It just came out at the end of last year. And
You're like
as
the
you
first person to get any Horowitz book, I think, right?
I usually am, yeah. Stoneham, I'll bring it back soon. You can see, as you can see, it's quite a thick book. And it's funny, when I first looked at it, I thought, I flipped to the back and I saw 357 pages. So I'm like, why, this feels huge. I'm like, is it the font? Like, is it a smaller format? No, it has within it a separate 224 page book. So it is, yes. So it is close to 600 pages. But so if you remember, his one of his more recent books from a couple years ago was Magpie Murders, and that had a story within a story.
Yeah.
This has a story within a story, and it's even more fleshed out than that one. I mean, this is literally a 200-page book in the middle of this 360-page book. So
in different typeface, so it's smaller or something? Like, how does it physically work?
It just changes. You just get to the middle and it's like, it's almost as if, because it even has a copyright page, it's almost as if they bound it like in with the,
I get it,
in the middle. So
And
there's
the
a
page
break in
number
the
just
main action, and
Right.
you pop
And so
over to this fictional
the
book.
page numbering that you originally saw was for the outer
The
book.
whole,
Got it.
right, it's for the main story, so it's
Right.
very confusing. Yeah, because I actually went back and checked, and I was like, oh, because it really does, the page number stops and then it starts again. So in the last one, and I remember talking with you about this, Jeff, we got attached to the character in the story within the story, Atticus Pund, and you're like, oh, you kind of think to yourself, oh, I want to go back and read the other books by him, but like he's made up.
Not a real person.
So this gives you a chance to revisit him because it is a sequel, I guess. You could read this one without having read the first one. It would not be, I feel like you would lose a little bit of something, but it would be okay. So this follows the main character from Magpie Murders, who is his publisher, his editor, Susan Ryland.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So this is 2 years later. She and her partner Andreas, who is Greek, have moved to Crete.
Right.
So there's some Greece in there, Jeff.
Yeah.
And so they've been living there for 2 years. They're running a hotel, and someone from England reaches out to her to come to England and help them look into a crime. And it's related to one of the books that she edited, that was by the author Alan Conway, he was the subject of he was murdered in the first book, and that was his story. So they think that the answer to this current crime lies in one of his last books, which was about the same family. He had based it on this family. And now they have a crime, and they think that it's related to something that he wrote or that he knows about it. So he wants, because she edited his books, they want her to go through and like reread it and see if she sees anything, and sort of kind of do an amateur investigation. So in the process, she goes back to reread the book. So then you read the book, and it's almost, there is even a whole chapter in the inner book that is an entirely separate story. So it's almost 3 books. So it's,
oh my God,
the inside. I mean, I would say one of these chapters almost functions as a short story because it provides backstory to this fictional story.
And for viewers who don't know Anthony Horowitz, you have to say this man
Midsummer Murders
loves a meta mystery, like a meta within meta within meta. That's what he does, is write mysteries inside mysteries inside mysteries. So this is classic.
Yes, and so he also is the person who wrote the show Midsummer Murders on BBC, and all of his books feel like an episode of that.
And
like
Foyle's War.
Foyle's
War. I just love Foyle's War.
I know, I do too. Some of the murders are actually kind of horrific, but in the context of the way he writes, they almost feel like kind of ridiculous. Like they're not upsetting in the way that they should be, because something about his tone is still not that bleak.
That the thing in British mystery writing that they manage.
I don't know how.
There's one school of British mystery writing that manages to get that tone so that even the most ridiculously horrible things are not.
Yes, this is like the crime in this is fairly horrific, but you're sort of just like, what? They don't. I mean, it's
cozy.
It's not quite cozy, but he does an excellent job of. I mean, both mysteries. Actually, I should say all three mysteries, because the little short story is a mystery in and of itself, are all very clever. They're not guessable. His detective Atticus is very Sherlock Holmesy, so you have that kind of old-timey mystery Agatha Christie feel. And the main mystery kind of unfolds that way too. And she even does the scene at the end where they have everybody in the room.
Oh.
Then the killer is unveiled, but she's laughing about it, like she's kind of making fun of herself while she's doing it.
Wow.
So it's a really good read. It's really fun, and for it being almost 600 pages is fast. You get very immersed in all of the stories. And if you've read any of his others, it's what was his other The Word is Murder?
The Word is Murder. Well, there was also M is for murder. No, M.
Is that what it was? Something like that.
The Word is Murder is one, and then but I think there's an M is murder.
There's one.
Yeah, there is an M.
But so those are different character. But this follows Magpie Murders, and again, you don't necessarily have to have read it, but you might want to read that one first. They mention it. I mean, it helps to understand what happened, but you would still enjoy it, I think, either way. So that was Moonflower Murders by Anthony Horowitz.
Yeah, that's the problem. They all start with some kind of M, and they get
They do.
mixed.
I get them all mixed up.
Yeah. Okay, well that's a nice diversion. It sounds like.
Darken it back up for us, Karen.
All right, Beth, you're up.
Yeah, I don't know that it's too dark. Well, it's sort of, but it does involve Greece, mine. A year ago, Alyssa, one of our fellow librarians, assembled a list of books entitled Old Tales, New Voices, taking myths, fairy tales, things like that, and retelling them, maybe from a different point of view, from a different person, a different character, maybe a different time period, just something different from the original story. Two of the ones she talked about, briefly she talked about, were historical novels by Madeline Miller, Circe and Song of Achilles. And I'm going to talk about Song of Achilles. And let's see if you can, is that, oh.
There you go.
There it is.
There you go.
So there you go. And that's, the new voice in it is Patroclus, who is Achilles, who is the great warrior from the Trojan War. And you might know him from, if somebody says you're Achilles' heel.
Mhm.
So he is the new voice it's not Homer telling the story, and it's not the story of Achilles, although it's the story of Achilles and Patroclus.
It's a love story.
Yeah.
It's a love story.
It's
But
like
it starts
Achilles
out
before
from
he was famous.
what?
Yeah.
Achilles before he was famous.
Achilles before he was famous, right? So it's not really a retelling because it's a filling into the background.
Yeah.
Because we don't know much about who Achilles was, and even less about Patroclus. So she is telling it from when Patroclus gets exiled by his father, a king, to and he's exiled to the home of Achilles, who is also a prince. And Achilles' father takes in all these exiled princes and raises them. So Achilles takes Patroclus as his friend, it's a very honored position, and they grow into young men together, learning about the art of war, learning about the art of medicine, and their bond blossoms into something much deeper, a love story. Despite the displeasure of Achilles' mother, the sea nymph Thetis. But then word, they're having this idyllic time pretty much, comes that Helen of Sparta, who you know as Helen of Troy, has been kidnapped. So Achilles goes to fight, and Patroclus, in love with him, follows him, because Patroclus is not really a warrior, but he doesn't want to be separated from Achilles. So in this tale, their love has to withstand the disapproval of their elders, dire prophecies, war, and the wrath of the gods themselves. So there's a lot going on. It's a love story. It's also drama. And it's not just their story. Miller widens it out to include Brias, who is one of the women of Troy that is captured and given to Achilles as a war bride. Again, very little is written about her, but here Miller gives her complexity and personhood. Miller delves into her character's innermost feelings and carefully draws out the humanity of them and their consequent vulnerability. So Miller is a college professor of the classics, and she teaches ancient Greek and Latin. And she did extensive research for the book. She explored what the ancient Greeks wore, what they ate, what their boats were like, what the flora and fauna of the area was like. And it wasn't just one monolithic landscape. It was because Patroclus travels. He travels from his home to Achilles' home to some Greek isles on their way to Troy, and then to Troy. So and those aren't all the same. There's the shore there. Oh yeah, I forgot there's a cave where they get taught by Chiron.
Mhm.
So a lot of different settings that she just makes blossom. She just paints them just beautifully. So again, love story, tragedy, drama, it's all there. And if any of you have read her other books, Circe, I would read both of them. They're both excellent. They differ in tone. They're both love stories. Song of Achilles is much slower. It's a developing love, and it's a fight between love and everlasting glory, whereas Circe is more waiting on love. Circe being torn between her own divinity and the allure to her of humanity. Circe goes through a long process of self-discovery and fighting her destiny, and Achilles really doesn't fight it. He just postpones it. And there's a lot more blood in Achilles because he is a warrior. So there's a lot of blood and death, and I'd say more gore. Both are fascinating. Both are really fast read because she pulls you along, and her language is just beautiful and transformative. So she can create all this. It's just really wonderful.
She really makes mythology seem like these are real people and real characters, and you can totally imagine being there. It's not a story. Yeah.
And there is some God stuff in there, especially his Achilles' mother, but it just felt like, well, this is the way it is then, you know, this is how that world is. It just, yeah, I think it's,
yeah, the gods are just there. They're just part of life. I mean,
yeah, exactly.
In the way that, you know, we were talking about this, the difference between some books, the gods are presented as just reality because the people that you're writing about would have seen them that way. They just were, they were as real to them. You know, they weren't some kind of mythology. They weren't some kind of being on high that you can't see. They were part of life.
The fabric.
And she does that she does
really well. Really well.
I think the only criticism I could possibly have of her is that she doesn't write enough books.
It's been like 7 or 8 years between books. So.
Yeah, because she could take any number of classical mythology stories and do this, and I'm sure it would be superb and a bestseller. I hope she does do more because they're just beautiful.
Well, there's certainly, even within the Iliad and the Odyssey, there are more characters she could choose from.
She's doing so much research. I can imagine.
I think that's it. Is that she's really trying to fill in her backstories.
Some of the other authors that do that, Mary Renault.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to give a shout out to the Canongate myth series, because what that series does is the retelling of myths. So and they take famous authors. So like Margaret Atwood did the Penelope ads, which is the story of Odysseus's wife,
Oh.
Penelope, and what
That
happened.
was really, I remember reading that. It was really
Yeah.
good.
It's really, they're excellent. I read the one by, it's called Wait, by the one who did Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit. Shoot. Well, anyway, Jeanette Winters. Jeanette Winters.
You got
Really
there
good.
again. All right. So I'm going to finish with another book about mythology or goddesses, gods, and well, it is and it isn't. Sorry, this is one of those ones where the gods are really just part of it all, and it's called Sharks in the Time of Saviors, and it's by a new author. So this is a debut. Whoops, let's get my. His name is Kawhi Strong Washburn. And so I'll just start by saying that despite the really cool cover with the shark on it and the title, the book is not all about sharks. It's they do play a pivotal role in the plot, in that when 7-year-old Nainoa Flores falls overboard from a tourist boat into a shiver of sharks off the coast of his home on the
I
big
have to say, I love that, a shiver of sharks.
I know. It is
Wonderful.
amazing that, but yes, and that's so when he falls off the boat and into the sharks, and this is off his home on the big island of Hawaii. This kind of miracle occurs when one of the sharks delivers him in its mouth gently back to the boat. So and this becomes kind of the most famous of the many miraculous events in Nainoa's childhood, during which time he also begins to show evidence of becoming a healer.
Is this supposed to be contemporary?
This is set in modern times. It actually
Oh, okay.
starts in 1995 and spans the years to 2009. So it's like 14 years in modern times. So yes, so this is all in modern times, but these events and the powers that he has lead his family to understand that, you know, he is somehow very special. And then through this little boy who during the course of the book becomes a man, and then later through the other members of his family, we come to understand something about the connections between Native Hawaiians and their ancient gods and their land. So Washburn does many things well, and the first of which is character and family relationships. So while everyone in the family recognizes Nainoa being kind of special, it has different effects on each member of the family. And one of the things that Washburn does really well is really beautifully portray the complexity of those family relationships. So Nainoa's parents feel a reverence for what they perceive as his connection to the ancient gods, whereas his brother and sister, like many brothers and sisters, each in their different ways, just kind of feels overshadowed and overlooked by this constant focus on Nainoa and his specialness. So this leads to all, you know, shifting dynamics between different family members over time. But if you want to talk about having an ear for the nuances of relationship and not to mention just the individual voices of each character, Washburn's ear is pitch perfect. Mm. And at this point, I just have to throw in and tell you that the chapters are you know, single point of view, alternating points of view between the family members. So you're getting the story as they cycle through. Each family member gets a chapter, and when you listen to it, and I would highly recommend the audio, there are different actors for each voice, which I think it's a pretty big coup for a debut novel to have, like, you know, separate actors for each character in the book. And not only that, but these are actors who are definitely familiar with Hawaiian accents and dialects and stuff. So it feels really authentic, and it really kind of sucked me in. It was fantastic listening. So I would totally recommend that. So the other thing here in this book is the connection to the old gods, and that is very much about a connection to the land itself. So the descriptions of the Hawaiian landscape are really central to the book, and they're really evocative. Although, you know, these are not necessarily scenes that we, say, as tourists would see. Most of these are places are seen through the eyes of the people who grew up in the land. And this is also not the Hawaii of wealth and tourism. This is very much a land in which there are signs of poverty. The people living in poverty are mixed in with this sort of gorgeous landscape. And the Flores family is poor. They live from paycheck to paycheck. They have to move away from their home and to another island when the jobs go away. They have to rely on scholarships to get their very talented children to college on the mainland. And I would say that there is a feeling throughout the book that this poverty is not their birthright, that they are destined for something different, but they don't know what it is, and they're trying to figure it out. You know, this poverty is something that's been foisted upon them by society, Western society, modern times, capitalism, all kinds of things. So in many ways, this is a very gritty kind of modern book with a lot of the darkness, like that gap between rich and poor that we find in modern life today. And there is also a central tragedy in the book, but it's not at the end. So what that means is that after the tragedy, there's this movement and growth that takes both the characters and the readers towards something that is both simpler and more powerfully positive at the end. Washburn weaves all of this complexity of all of these threads together, and his writing just beautifully, magically embodies Hawaii and its landscape and its people and their gods, while at the same time creating this story that is at its heart about those very earthly, familial bonds that transcend all cultures and locations. And then Washburn just kind of creates this alchemy and brings all this stuff together in a story that you really can't put down. I would say it's an amazing debut. So that's Sharks in the Time of Saviors by Kauai Strong Washburn.
And wouldn't we all love to be in Hawaii right now?
Well, it'll definitely take you there. I mean, it's beautiful and wrenching, but in the end, like I said, ultimately positive. Anything else we have to add?
Well, I think that is a good segue to our program on the book Evicted, because it sounds like they get evicted.
Oh, that's true.
Right? And they have to face the consequences of,
That's a segue. Yeah, we got, so we have coming up a book discussion as part of our Commit to Your Community series. We have a nonfiction first, and then a fiction discussion. And they are on the subject, both of them, of homelessness in its different forms. Evicted comes up quite soon.
Tomorrow.
You may not even see this before that happens, but then we have the fiction discussion, which is, the book is called
Symphony
for the Man by Brill is the author.
Sarah Brill. Yep.
Sarah Brill, yeah. And the date for that is, Jackie?
February 24th. So you still have time to go pick it up. We bought extra copies. It's also on Overdrive.
Right.
We hope you'll join us for that.
Yeah, that's all set in Australia. And it's the story of a young woman who decides to write a symphony for a homeless man that she encounters. And it's both of their stories. It's not just hers. It's both of them. Okay, so keep an eye out for those on our website, wakefieldlibrary.org, and on our social media, Instagram, Facebook, and keep an eye out for these recordings of this program on our YouTube channel, as well as on WCAT.
And if you would prefer something other than reading, we also do a separate program called Beebe Flicks, where some of us get together and talk about what you might want to watch. So
right. Yeah, they definitely have a good time on that show. Of course, there is all of our other program, again, to find at wakefieldlibrary.org. We have trivia every month at the end of the month. One of those is coming up soon. So join us is what we're trying to say. And with that, I will say goodbye and thank you for watching BB Book Buzz. Join us next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.